Hey, David.
Hi. All right. So I think where we were is we were with a tree. We were with that tree. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, we were in Savannah, Georgia, and you were noting a tree that was impacted by a cast iron fence.
Yeah.
With some very nice.
So I don't know whether the
nice
tree impacted the cast iron or the cast iron impacted the tree. But at some point, we had two things that were separated, and I'm not so sure if I want to make this all about like the insurance industry or not, but there's a part of me that kind of does, because that tree was planted on the inside of the property boundaries, right? That fence was on the boundary of the property. That fence was designed not to hold up the tree. The tree was not designed to lean over the fence and use the fence as support. But at some point, because nobody paid attention, one thing grew over the other, and they came into contact for so long, they're almost hopelessly intertwined. And they both affect the other one in a way that the other one really shouldn't have to deal with. The tree should be able to move, but the tree can't move naturally. A tree that can't move naturally can't withstand storms the same way, right?
Right.
The fence was never designed to handle the weight of a tree moving not just in a straight up and down plane, but on an angle. All right? Not the way that was designed to handle weight. That wasn't what it was made for. The tree, in order to move, is going to move that fence out. Chances are a really, really good blow means both the tree can't flex like it's supposed to and it bends and breaks, or doesn't bend and break, and the fence gets warped, distorted, or leans over under the weight that it's not designed and created to actually maintain. So you think about this in the context of an insurance industry. We have things that are so hopelessly intertwined now that you can't break them apart. Here's an example. Expert file I'm working on. We have a TPC. TPC comes in, does a peer review, values it at about $100,000, a little bit above. Then they get hired to do an actual audit and drops it by about 60%. Then they get named expert, get expert reports, get all kinds of information, and then refuse to go back, don't create an opinion, and don't update their valuation based on all the information that comes from that. So what we have is we have what should be a neutral, independent, and or expert, right? Involved in a way, embedded into the insurance system in a fashion that they're now kind of caught in. See, because an expert, their job as an expert is, this is how much it costs. I'm concerned that this isn't required, but it's not my job to omit it. It's my job to identify, I don't think it's required, and here's the 7 reasons I don't think it's required. And then I go let the carrier be the carrier.
Okay.
The carrier put in their limitation, their policy exclusion. Let them take not only, the risk of doing that, but for them to have their contractual sovereignty, because that's what they're supposed to have. We as experts, we're not supposed to be pitching a position. We can have opinions, but our job is to find all the damage and then write whether or not we think it should be one way or the other. But for example, an appraisal, to omit something that's not really because you don't think it should be included is in essence adjusting and placing a policy limit in it. To write it and say there might not be coverage for it, the carrier may want to push limit on it. Perfectly acceptable. That's the way the policy, in my estimation, is generally written, the way I understand it. So we have these systems, and it was never meant, that tree was never meant to lay on top of and put pressure on that fence. And that fence was never meant to support the weight of the tree. It makes both of them not work the way they're supposed to, and one can affect the other in profound ways that nobody anticipated when they did it. And it didn't happen immediately. The relationships that we have in the insurance industry, they lop over one another. And at some point, they became a little too cozy. Guys, that's a little too cozy. That's a little too cozy to the point where you're kind of actually joined. And again, nobody meant for that to happen. It's just Either nobody noticed it, or maybe they kind of liked the tree leaning a little bit over that fence a little bit, so they thought they'd maybe leave it that way just a little bit. Maybe they thought that'd be a solid idea. They didn't mind.
This is kind of like the law of unintended consequences.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of that into it. And no, and this is what happens when you give me a couple days off. I get all kinds of philosophical. But I think we have things that don't work the way we intend for them to work because nobody really minded the boundary. That tree, that limb could have been pulled back into the tree and trained a different direction. It could have been. It could have been cut off. Tree could have been planted another 2 feet over. All kinds of things could have happened. By the way, the fence couldn't have done much about it. The fence was the fence was the fence was the fence. Some things are movable, like policy. But there are things that move in and around it. So, I was kind of thinking about that, and as I was going through doing trial prep, I was working with attorneys recently on this file, and unfortunately, this TPC, because they didn't make the adjustments, because they didn't reconsider, because I think they're locked into a place that they can't really move. So consider this. They did a peer review at over $100,000, but they did an audit at 40, or at, about 60% of it. Now, how do you explain that? Either you've given way too much on your peer review, or you've taken way too much off on your audit, but you can't have both things at once. Where you really have the issue is what happens when you're given an enormous amount of additional information and then make not one single change in your scope, given that enormous information. Don't ask one more question. Just hunker in and say, I was hired for a peer review, then I was hired for an audit, and now I'm an expert. I think this is tough because in this particular instance, I don't know if the TPC could do anything different without almost, I kind of hate to say it, they kind of almost neutered themselves in a sense. Because I don't know they could have made much of a change. At this point, I don't think they can make a change. But I think they made a change back there.
But the key part there is the TPC in this particular case didn't commit enough time and mental resources to the claim.
Well, we guess, maybe not. Like the person that did it, there's much of what they did that I don't complain with and don't argue with, but there's some base assumptions that once they owned them, they couldn't go back and do other things. If you exclude half the house because you think that there is an exclusion-worthy cause of loss or complication to the loss, you can do that in a peer review, but you can't do it as an expert. I can't take it off and make it stick unless I have a really, really, really solid line of data to do it. And now we're kind of obered into the, kind of the Daubert area. Because for those of you who don't know, there's a seminal case in expert work called Daubert. And in this Daubert case, they outline certain things that a testifying professional expert has to do, and they have to follow readily accepted, widely used science. And then they have to apply their actual opinions through that science to their actual conclusion. And if you fail to do any of those things, then what you have is you have a file that is ripe for what they call a Daubert challenge. So if you as a umpire or you as not an umpire, but as an expert, although I do know umpires that do this, if you as an expert come through or appraiser is what I meant, sorry. If you as appraiser come through, and I have one right now where they were trying to omit all the subsequent damages after the first X number of days because in their opinion, the insured should have mitigated the loss better, faster, more completely, regardless of how that would have handled the file. The carrier's still in the middle of an inspection. It was the panel's opinion. Well, one party in the panel's opinion, that them not tearing off the roof, replacing the roof, tearing off all the siding, replacing the siding, tearing out all the windows, replacing the windows, because they had not done that, that the ongoing stabilization and any ensuing damage was their fault. Now, a carrier can have that position because a carrier can be sued for that position. But how about an umpire or a panel or an appraiser that puts forward that position?
Well, they're playing with fire because that's out of their purview, in my opinion.
But it happens all the time. I've got file after file after file where specifically they have heartburn over stabilization in this stuff.
Yeah,
and there's.
But I mean, I'll tell you this: one of the easiest umpire positions I ever overcame was one where the umpire said, in the presence of the insured, "I'm not going to do the rest of this IICRC stuff that's in the protocol because the insured had a duty to mitigate and they did not."
Yeah.
And I promptly said I said, well, if we're talking policy, we can also say that the carrier didn't follow its duty to indemnify. But at this moment, I'm going to ask the insured to ask us to leave. And then we went and dealt with some court. And we got that done, and they paid my estimate. We went on about life. But the point being is yes, a lot of people make the mistake of trying to make that delineation and appraisal. And I don't think it's fair.
It doesn't just happen there. And part of this is because I don't think appraisers and experts fight back. You know, when I do trial prep with my attorneys, we actually read through, and I work for carriers, I work for contractors, I work for insureds, I work for anybody that will tolerate me telling the truth and let me do my job and not interfere with me. So we read the opinion. Baked into the opinion, if you give anybody enough words, you're going to find their theology behind what they're doing. And the moment they leave rigid fact structures without identifying that they've done it, they're over into their own theology. And the moment they're over into their theology, they're over into opinions. And once they're in opinions, they're really outside of the purview of, number one, where they should operate, and number two, where they're certainly safe. There's been a bunch of experts stricken lately because they're not putting forth proper fact predicate bases. If I don't have great sampling on a project, I don't have great sampling on a project. I say I don't have great sampling on a project. Could be there, could not be there. Here's all the other things that affect it. Here's the damage as it works. Everyone could go back and decide they don't want to pay for a little bit here, a little bit there, but you're going to do it understanding the fullness of it. The danger is where we have people that think they're hired to create a narrative for a party rather than a narrative for the truth. That's the problem.
Right.
And those are the people I see working constantly. How about you?
But to your point, you're talking about these things that are interconnected in ways that nobody saw coming, and how they put undue pressure on either side. Let's be clear. If I had something akin to carrier guidelines in my work, if I had that carrier guidelines, then it will create a cacophony of actions that aren't necessarily in the policy. But if we say it long enough, it'll be true. I'll give you a great example of this. Our dear CFO in Florida went to a meeting last week. I think it was Thursday in Daytona, and stood in front of a bunch of business people and said, "Don't sue your insurance company. If you do, they'll go out of business." Okay. So So what he was doing now, his own insurance commissioner says that litigation costs has never been a reason in Florida ever as to why an insurance company failed. But my point is that we've baked in the cake that particular law right there. And what are the unintended consequences of that? Or maybe the intended consequences, but we baked in the cake. So we see even people, because we think that, hey, if we pay the claim appropriately, some people now think if they pay the claim appropriately, that we're part of the problem and we're going to run the carriers out of business. Like that's really weird. That would be like if I went to go get my truck fixed, and they were like, well, we could only do 3 of your brakes because of guidelines. I mean, it doesn't make sense. I'm saying, but
it's because we got stuff connected in ways that they shouldn't be connected, and it binds them up both from operating the way that they should be operating. This is a profound problem we got here. And the problem is to yank it and break it apart is going to be painful.
Yes, it is.
The reality is our loss severities have been artificially suppressed through estimating systems for about the last 15 years. They have been. Not only has the severity, the amount been suppressed, but there's been a lot of control over means and methods, the application and proper execution of standards, stuff like that, which have also held it back. Then we have a lack of actual market pricing that's held it down.
Right.
And what we're experiencing here is all of a sudden there's enough education, I think, within the insurance restoration industry, and they just ran out of things to not do. Do you know I could charge for a whole house and only paint 2 rooms and do a little bit on the floor and do a cabinetry repair? All right. And on that $15,000 scope, I can go for a really, really long time cutting that scope of work by hook or by crook. I can do that for a long time until they've cut my bill so much that I can't make ends meet even doing that. And that's what's happened in large part. We have companies realize that they aren't making money. We have companies that realize they're exposed. No, you and I have both put companies out of business, not because we did it, but because a CGL carrier got sued, or the insured or the carrier or the contractor, right, got revealed that what they did was not sufficient, not appropriate, not right. Or a carrier, although they never go out of business, they kind of like the government, just print more money. But they just do it next year in their premium increase rather than go to the printing press and let the Fed do the dirty work. So we're in the middle of a mess, and this is part of our problem, dude. If we don't talk about the real problem, we can't find a real solution. All right, it's like somebody walks in the room and you walk into a room and it stinks. You can blame it on the ventilation. You can blame it on what's cooking. You can blame it on the dog. You can blame it on the trash in the corner. And the reality is, until you figure out that somebody forgot their deodorant, you're not going to fix the problem. You're just not. It's still going to stink, and you can ventilate the crap out of everything. You can redesign the house. You can change where you cook, change where you clean, the way you clean. You can do all kinds of things. But until you know what the real problem is, you can't create a real solution. And that's all we're doing it feels honestly like it's smoke and mirrors. We're going to control our loss severity by cutting away the ability to litigate against your carrier if they don't pay properly.
Hey, look,
that's not the core of the issue. Sometimes it is, but not all the time.
David, I have a policy we're going to discuss during our community call this week, where the carrier put a 2% deductible in Texas. 2% deductible.
Not a storm deductible, just a
2% deductible for hail.
Okay.
And said that the repair of that hail would be either the cost of repair for the hail or 2%. whichever is less.
DOI said, what?
Yeah, no. And I mean, and that was given to me by an independent adjuster who was having to adjust a claim with that and was like, oh my God, what do I do? Like, this is not even a real policy. I think that's crazy. But let me just say one thing to you about what we were talking about. You know, recently I had an appraisal where after we agreed to the roof, I found out that I didn't know at the time because there was no interior damages, but we'd agreed to the roof, and I found out later that the decking was gapped. It was 1x6 gapped. It was a building that was built in 1912.
Okay.
And so I said to my opposing, I said, hey, I didn't realize this, but we're going to have to replace the sheathing on the roof because it was made for, you know, a time long gone by for cedar shake. And obviously this is this is not a, it's just, obviously it needs to be replaced now because we're putting shingles on it and we can't do that. And his response to me was, I'm not going to be expanding the scope and I'm going to invoke the umpire. By the way, the umpire has a retainer of $13,000. This is a $63,000 claim. So we went from like extremely civil and extremely fact-based operation, and we moved to utter lunacy. By the way, how is the umpire complicit in this lunacy at this juncture? Just I want to know what you think.
How far are the parties apart?
What's that?
How far are the parties apart?
About 50 grand.
Okay. How's he complicit? Both appraisers agree on this particular umpire knowing this.
He was appointed by a weird method. So I didn't have anything to do with it.
Judicial? Not
judicial. A bunch of lawyers selected him.
Oh.
Yeah. Really terrible. I mean, terrible. But my point is simply this: for something.
No, I kind of want to dig some more because I bet it's going to get better. Yeah, we have 1 minute, and I can't wait to see how it's going to work out.
My point is simply this: this thing is going to cost the insured $6,500
plus his appraiser.
What's that?
Plus his appraiser.
To work out this little $50,000 problem because somebody decided that they're not going to get any more business if they operate in a different way. And how can you have
you mean that?
Yeah. If you're so interconnected that you can't make a decision on your own, then it puts us in a kind of hopeless situation. And I honestly think we shouldn't get mad at the lawyers as much as we do, because that interconnectedness creates a necessity for counsel.
At some point, one just can't move. And that's the problem. You have adjusters that can't write true scopes. You have adjusters that are told you can only pay for what you see. All right? Most of those adjusters know how to write more, but they're limited what they can do because of their adjusting guideline. You know, one of the questions going to be asked, and I always have as one of my questions in lawsuits, especially when I'm dealing with a TPA or TPC, produce every single document that's ever been made on this, every single document you were trained on, especially specifically this company, of how they told you you were allowed to do your job. Because TPCs are allowed to do their job. And by the way, oftentimes vendor systems, they're allowed to do their job in a particular way.
David, you're right. But, you know, keep in mind, they don't always tell them all this. Sometimes it's just lore. Sometimes
it's culture.
And on the other side of the line, you said it earlier. Lots of experts believe what? They're writing an expert for a particular position.
Right.
And neither one of those work.
Oh, they do. They do work. They work when I don't work and you don't work.
But that's
how many conversations have you had with carriers? What's your close rate? I hate to say close rate. How often when you're contacted by a carrier are you engaged versus how often when you're contacted by plaintiff counsel? I guess that would be carriers counsel, defense counsel versus plaintiff counsel or insurer.
Defense counsel about 50%, plaintiff counsel about 80%. It's
and I'm probably similar, but I'm going to bet you I'm 25 for defense. Not that I don't want to do the rest.
Yeah, but understand that carriers usually call me whenever the insured's done something heinous. Okay.
And that's the ones I tend to get.
That's when they're caught. When they do something really terrible where I can
in the contractor. You may get the insureds, I get the contractor. I'm going to have to add in the insured. But still, same.
Yeah, if that side of the coin's done something heinously wrong, absolutely. And that's when they call me. And that's
our theology.
I know they're conscious. I know they're conscious of this thing about this difference about some people writing for a particular position. They're conscious of it too. They know what they're doing.
And you know what? I'm working with one of the larger defense firms in Florida right now on a file, defense side. And you know what? This particular attorney, do whatever you need to do. We'll pay the bill. What it is what it is. If there's a problem, if there's an issue, I'd rather know it now so we can decide how we move forward.
Yeah, well,
and you know what? You think that it doesn't work like that on the other side. If you only work plaintiff, you think someone's cooking the books on the other side.
Look, I had someone. I had someone in Georgia not long ago. A carrier in Georgia contact me and say, "I need you to pull you in as an expert on this one." And I said, "Well, what's the problem?" He says, "Well, they claim that we're not giving them enough of this material to do this, that, and the other. And I mean, it's just fast going to lawsuit, and we need to deal with it." And I go look at it and realize that the carrier just happened to measure the wrong building.
Yeah.
I mean,
or ignored half of what's in their file.
They measured the wrong building. They just didn't realize it. And what was really funny was the counsel told the carrier folks that they did that, and they fought their own lawyers about 2 weeks before they did it.
Yep.
I mean, I know you got to get going
too. Hey, did you know your own file said that everything was damaged 5 days after the date of loss? You've been fighting me for 9 months in appraisal, and your own file, by the way, that you didn't give me, you didn't surrender in production to me. Your own file says that it was all damaged, all involved, all needed to be got from the very beginning. Well, and I guess on that happy note, I lost him. Dave, he just got up and he walked away. Dave, if you can hear me, I've got to go. Hugs and kisses.